Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pole Position News. It's time to discuss the key points from the preseason tests. And there's one thing everyone seems to agree on among the experts. Who's the fastest team? We're going to dive into that now. We've got some interesting data to share, starting with how much faster each team was compared to last year's tests. Sauber is the only team that was slower, while every other team showed improvements. The Racing Bulls and Ferrari improved by half a second, Mercedes by 0.81 seconds, and Alpine showed a 2-second improvement, which isn't surprising considering Alpine was struggling at the start of last year. Now, with that in mind, you might want to pay attention to Sauber. Even though we know that test times aren't the final word and aren't what we weigh most heavily, it's still something to note. When comparing the total laps of last year's test to this year's, we see that Red Bull did the least amount of laps, with 77 fewer than last year. Aston Martin, Ferrari, and Sauber also did fewer laps, while Haas, McLaren, Alpine, Racing Bulls, Williams, and Mercedes all completed more laps. Mercedes, for example, did 97 more laps, and Williams did 96 laps, which is a significant increase from last year. This is a great sign for these teams. But what you really want to know is about their pace, right? Before we get into that, let me mention that the driver with the most laps completed in the 2025 preseason was Ocon, followed by Hadjar, with Stroll, Lawson, and Hamilton at the bottom. Now, if these drivers did fewer laps and their teammates did more, that's one thing. But that's not the case for Aston Martin and Red Bull, where both their drivers are among the least active. In Ferrari's case, Hamilton's laps are fewer, but Leclerc is among the top, so it's not a big issue for Ferrari, but it does raise questions about Hamilton's adaptation. Now, about the fastest sectors, Williams was consistently in the top 2 for the quickest sectors. This doesn't necessarily mean they're going to challenge for the title, but it does show they put a lot of effort into these tests, possibly to measure how their car compares to last year, given that their performance was poor last season. Still, Williams showed impressive results. Ferrari, too, was always in the top 3. So both teams have maintained a strong pace in the preseason tests in terms of raw performance and total laps. Mercedes, on the other hand, completed the most laps, while Red Bull and Aston Martin did the least. This is concerning for those teams because fewer laps means less data, and we're talking about tons of terabytes of information here. A lot of data is coming in, and fewer laps can have a huge impact. So, what's being said about the race pace? It seems that McLaren and Ferrari are the two teams with the best race pace, with Mercedes very close behind. But what would be the weaknesses of Mercedes and Ferrari? Mercedes is facing more issues toward the end of their stints, and with tire temperature, similar to last year. Ferrari, on the other hand, still struggles with tire degradation like in previous seasons. So, the same problems are carrying over, at least with this preseason spec. However, I must make it clear that some teams will likely have updates by the time they reach Australia. So what we've seen in preseason may change. Right now, McLaren seems to be the most consistent and fastest team, comfortably on top. Ferrari has the same issues as last year, while Mercedes, though improved, still has some inconsistencies. Red Bull is a mystery. They also look fast, but they seem to be more erratic compared to the others. This could be because of the floor they tried on the last day, which didn't work. The front wing seemed fine, but the floor didn't quite do its job. It's expected that Red Bull will remove that floor spec before going to Australia. There's a consensus among the experts that McLaren is the team to beat, at least with the preseason spec. McLaren has the best car, the fastest, the most consistent, with fewer issues. McLaren is stepping up as the team to beat this season, something we haven't seen since around 2008. It's been a long time since McLaren was considered the favorite in Formula One, but this year, they're definitely in the spotlight. As for Alpine, these middle-of-the-pack teams like them might just be doing something strategic, running with less fuel, dialing up engine modes, and trying to look good on the timing sheets. What really matters here are the top teams, and McLaren stands out as being incredibly consistent. So, in practice, what are we seeing? McLaren appears to be the fastest and most consistent team by a considerable margin. The battle for second place seems to be between Mercedes and Ferrari, and interestingly, Ferrari and Mercedes aren't too far behind McLaren. The gap isn't huge, and it wouldn't be as dominant as Red Bull was in 2023. so it's a much closer fight. Some reports even say that Ferrari is very fast, but still immature, meaning their car just needs to be better understood by the team. Once they figure it out, they could be very competitive. As for Mercedes, there's some fluctuation in the analysis. Some view them as second, others as third or even fourth. Red Bull, meanwhile, is the most inconsistent team in these analyses, and there's less concrete data on them. They could challenge McLaren or end up as the fourth fastest team. We'll have to wait and see. Again, it's important to note that by the time we reach Australia, each team could have updates, so the pecking order might shift. As for Sauber, it seems like everyone agrees they're still the weakest team. They haven't made enough progress to challenge anyone else, though they are closer to the rest of the midfield than they were last year. However, it's still unlikely they'll be able to challenge teams like Haas, Aston Martin, or Racing Bulls. They'll likely be at the back of the grid. The real battle in the midfield will be between Williams and Alpine, with Williams looking a bit stronger. That said, Alpine could still be hiding something. So, the current state of the preseason looks like this. McLaren seems to be starting strong. Ferrari still has work to do. Mercedes and Red Bull are more inconsistent. The midfield could see a new leader, and Sauber remains the weakest. We'll see if teams bring updates to Australia. The first race is in about 2 weeks, and once the season kicks off, we'll get a clearer picture of how the grid shapes up. In short, McLaren is poised to be the top team at the start of the season. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss anything. See you in the next video.